Okay, so I just wanted to say hello. Today is the second day of our series and the end of the first week. So you guys, thank you for showing up today. We're excited to have you here. Today we'll be talking about Orchestrator and the integration services with Chris and Mason. And I'm Diana Gray. I'm the Community Marketing Manager. And I'm working with Anna Maria and Ravathi behind the scenes just to make sure that everything is ready for these, that you guys have access to Fusion and to all the materials that go along with the series. And then, as I mentioned, today we have on the call Chris, Mason, we have Akil and Devi who will be helping us with this session today. And they'll go through that in just a minute to introduce themselves. Um, and then, sorry, as I mentioned, today is the Specialized AI Associate Orchestrator Deep Dive and UiPath Integration Services. That's a topic. I just want to remind you guys too that make sure that you're reading the course descriptions and looking at the self-paced training that needs to happen this week. And if you need help, just let us know on the forum or ask questions during the session where our experts can help you if you've already gone through some of those exercises. If you would just keep yourself muted during the session unless they ask you to ask questions, and put any questions that you have in chat, that would be great. And then I also wanted just to go through a couple things. I will be putting the next week's session in the chat so that you can register for that to make sure you don't miss it. I will also put in our important links so that you can find the recordings that we're doing, the forum thread, the series page where you can register. And then also we'd like to invite you to a foreign contest that we're doing on Tell Your Public Service Work Story. So you can read through that. This is a copy of what you'd see when you click on the link, and I'll put that link in the chat as well. And then quickly, I just wanted to go through, we had a couple questions on the first session about the certification program. So this is the certification community program for the frameworks. And basically, when you're done with this course, we'll go through this again, but you would sign up to take the free certification and register for that path. And then that is what would give you the certification. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Bolin, who can.
Am I sharing my slide deck, Diana?
Not yet. So I'll tell you when it's up.
Are you sharing it or am I sharing it?
You're sharing it.
Okay. Tell me when to share.
Okay. Yeah, you can share now.
Hold on. Trying to find the right link to share, so bear with me. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
All right. Introduce myself. My name is Chris Bolin. I have been the UiPath MVP for 4 years now. That means I've been experiencing Diana Gray for 4 years. That's why I have no hair. Couple of housekeeping. We're going to talk about Orchestrator, but before we do, I know you had some homework that you were asked to do before this, and Orchestrator and Integration Services is only part of that homework, so that some of the other topics were project organization and studio, workflow analyzer, and UiPath implementation methodology. I wondered if anybody had any questions about any of that prerequisite pre-reading, pre-work that they have. If you could put that in the chat for us, we'll try and answer any questions about that.
Yeah, and Chris, I don't know if you want to put your slides in slide share mode.
I can. If you want me to be fancy, is that better?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Jeez, demanding. And another housekeeping thing, Mason's joining me. We've been working together for years and years, close friends. So we kind of banter a little bit. So hopefully we can make this as much fun as possible. And I am coming off of a bout of bronchitis and strep because I went to a conference with Diana and she slipped something in my coffee. So, and I think she's just out to get me. So if I start coughing, I'll go on pause and Mason will kind of pick up. So I apologize for any kind of problems that may cause you, but we'll try and get through this really well. So today we're going to talk about Orchestrator, and integration services. We'll start with Orchestrator. What is Orchestrator? Orchestrator is the hub where the bots live. It's their community. It's where their Walmart's at. It's where their doctors are at, and their grocery stores and their pharmacies. It's where they live. It's where your processes live. It's where your jobs live. It's where your bots live, and it's where they interact and kind of come together and carry out the tasks that you give them to do. So we typically publish studio projects into Orchestrator. We assign attended or unattended bots, and they interact within Orchestrator with other things. We'll go into a little bit about what Orchestrator has for Agentic today as well. But it's that command control center. It gives you logging. It gives you monitoring. It tells you about the bot, your program health, your bot health, how many faults you've had, how many failures you're having. And we'll kind of walk through that here in a moment. You can, within Orchestrator, you can have you have a primary tenant, but you can have multiple sub organizations through what we call folders. You can control access to the folders. Just as an example, I teach UiPath at the high school and university level. One of my universities that I teach, University of Delaware, does do folders for their groups. So she assigns a group project, and everything that's done for that group is done within a group folder. Only she and the people that are in that group have access to that folder, so that she can watch the progress of that program, of that project, and no one else can go into that project and kind of plagiarize or gather some information that they should have found on their own. Orchestrator feeds directly into UiPath Insights, although with UiPath Insights, you can also do log messages. We won't get into that deeply within your automation and tag those as something you want to measure in Insights if it's not automatically integrated through Orchestrator. And Orchestrator is available on-prem, which we call Automation Suite. And you can also do Automation Suite in kind of a hybrid, but it's also available in Automation Cloud. One of the things you should note, though, is when we start talking about the functionality that pertains to tools for agents to use, are not all available in the on-prem Automation Suite yet. Automation Cloud, typically, you'll find these newer emerging technologies that UiPath develops in the cloud before they are released into on-prem Automation Suite. And I'll kind of point those out to you when we get to those. All right, so let's do a walkthrough. I'm going to stop sharing real quick so I can pull up stop sharing this so I can pull up a studio for you. So bear with Chris for a moment. And we'll pull up my Orchestrator instance. Can you see my Orchestrator instance, Diana?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Orchestrator. We land on Orchestrator sometimes by default. Sometimes if you're an admin, you will not necessarily land on Orchestrator by default, but you can always choose Orchestrator, excuse me, from this upper panel or from this link here. And this is where what Orchestrator looks like. These are going to be and this is just in my organization. It's just a testing cloud, a testing instance that we do for our clients, but these are the different entities that I've talked to you about that you can restrict access to. In this shared folder, not everybody, but this is where everybody can share the same information. If you're using the same tools or whatever it might be, you can do that in the shared folder. If you want to restrict it, you can then restrict it by your different subtenants. These are the automations that would appear in Orchestrator. Any jobs that you promote to Orchestrator will come up here into this jobs, these processes and jobs. These will be the ones that have been run. You're not going to see much on my instance because I can't let you see much on my instance. Apps are published apps from UiPath Apps. Triggers are time triggers that you can set up to run your automations on scheduled times. And then your logs. These will be the logs that will display as your jobs run. Now, when your jobs run, there will be some default logs that will appear here. But then if you have included in your code log message that you want specifically done to shown in these logs, it'll appear here as well. One of the things you have to remember is the more log messages you put in and the more opportunities and projects you have running in your Orchestrator hub, then the more of your database that supports Orchestrator is going to be filled up. So you want to be very cautious and very not, I don't say creative, but cautious and precise with the log messages that you want shown in Orchestrator, because each of those log messages can take up memory in your underlying database. All right. Monitoring is going to be where we see our automation health. You can see the status of jobs that are running. I think we have some. Maybe not. Maybe we've cleaned those out. But you can see the status of jobs that are running, jobs that are waiting to run, jobs that are in the process of stopping, whether you put in a stop signal, terminating, suspended, or jobs that have been resumed. They will also show you over here what jobs have been successful, what jobs have failed. You can click into this dashboard and determine, excuse me, what makes up those jobs. Here's where we're going into agents, and Agentic is another type of monitoring where you can monitor the progress of your agents within Orchestrator. Machines are machines that are attached. Those are local machine instances that are attached to your locals or to your Orchestrator. Excuse me. And queues. Queues are going to be where we're storing queue performance. And we'll get into queues and queue data in a moment. This is, you can see the performance of your queues. All right. That's the monitoring section of Orchestrator. When we get into queues, and we'll show you in Studio how to load a queue and how to process transactions with a queue. In queues, this is going to be items that are going to be transactional items that your bot has to process. So we load a queue in your bots, and you can have multiple bots hitting a queue at once. The bots will process a transaction in a queue. When that transaction is done being processed, it'll go to the next transaction in the queue and process those. Now in queues, we can set priorities. We can have a priority set to that. You want certain queue items processed first with a higher priority. Some queue items will be processed with a lower priority or a medium priority. So you can set some priorities on your queue items that need to be processed. Assets are going to be things that you're using in your automations, credentials, URLs. Remember, when we build an automation, we don't want to hard code a URL. We don't want to hard code any credentials. We don't want to hard code anything that can be put in the configuration file and then pointed to Orchestrator. I'll show you that in a moment as well. But assets will be those credential assets, URLs, things that are being used in your automation. Excuse me. Business rules, I'm not going to go into business rules very much. Storage buckets. Storage buckets are, they provide like a centralized storage within each folder, right? So it allows the developers to share and reuse files across automations, PDFs, machine learning data sets, configuration files. If you have a central config file, and that governs all of your automations. They do use the same permissions that are used in the folders in the storage buckets. So only persons that have access to that folder can have access to those storage buckets. So if Mason's in a different project or in a different folder, he can't necessarily access the data or the information I have in my storage buckets unless I give him access to that folder's storage buckets. You can browse through files in storage buckets. You can download files from storage buckets. You can do API calls to your storage buckets to the Orchestrator API. The storage buckets kind of support they can support Azure or AWS in your storage buckets. And the functions, like I said, can be create, edit, you can view, you can download. Indexes is something that is used, it's a newer functionality in Orchestrator. It's used for your AI and your Agentic. Now, indexes are only available in a cloud instance. They're not available in Automation Suite yet. They will be eventually, but they are not yet. Indexes are vector database folders. You can load specific business data, protocols, SOPs, policies into an index, and you can then do a contextual grounding, a RAG model to gather that information, so it kind of helps illuminate hallucination. So if you have an automation that is looking up a question from somebody in an NLP or something along that lines through an apps interface, looking at a company policy, how many PTO hours do I get per year type of deal. You can have that pointed to an index, and that way you focus only on that vectorized data folder that needs that that has that information in it. So that is only available in a cloud instance. Excuse me. You have to thank Diana for my coughing, so I apologize. Let's talk about MCP servers. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. So MCP server is something that agents can use across different agent processes or end-to-end processes for the agents. So you can build your own agent, your own MCP server. I will tell you, this UiPath one is not available for you to use at this time. This will be coming later in this year, probably in the October release, the 2025.10 release, but currently it is not available for you. You can host a coded MCP server. You can bring your own MCP server, or you can connect to a remote MCP server. And so this first one, this UiPath will expose kind of UiPath artifacts, workflows, agents, API workflows. And again, but this one isn't available yet. A coded server is something that you've coded yourself. When you've built your own agent or specialized workflow outside of UiPath and you incorporate, maybe you're doing a LangChain agent and you're bringing that into UiPath. Your command server, this one, like it says, connects to an external MCP package. And this last one, remote server, kind of does a secure tunneling to an MCP server. Okay, that is MCP servers. And again, MCP servers are only going to be available in a cloud instance at this moment, not in Automation Suite. Testing is going to take you to your test suite, your test functionality within Orchestrator, and then you have general settings. Pause for any questions about any of the functionality currently in Orchestrator. Nothing. You can come off mute and ask questions if you need to. Because if you don't ask questions, it just means that I did an excellent job at that, right? Let's go and let's see how we can load an Orchestrator queue. This is my studio. When I do an Orchestrator queue, I don't necessarily use an RE framework, although RE framework is the standard best practice for UiPath. But I can typically load a queue sequentially through a sequence. And Mason, I'm going to have to cough. I'm going to see if you can take this over for a moment.
Mason, you there?
Hey, Christopher.
I'm here.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks. So, sorry, guys.
So by the way, Chris, I think someone asked to re-explain the MCP server.
Like if you can, it's like a recent one. So
Re-explain the MCP server?
yeah,
Certainly. Let's go back to it. Can you see it?
Nothing's
yes,
showing on your screen. Oh, yeah, it is. Sorry.
yeah,
Is it showing?
Yeah, it is.
Bear with me as I try and get through this cough. I apologize, guys. Model Context Protocol, MCP, is kind of a server that an agent can have multiple tools within it that you can call with an agentic workflow as a tool for your agent to use. And it can be used by any agent. Let's say I have a Maestro orchestration process, and my agent needs to use an API, right, in that certain process. But then in a different orchestration process, I have another agent that needs to use that same API. So I house those kind of tools into an MCP server, right? So agents can use it. It's kind of like a toolbox in your shed, right? Anybody living in your home that has a key to the shed can go out there and grab that tool, right? Because you've given them access to that shed with the key. So any tool in that shed, they have access to. Doesn't matter the person. So if you think about your agent being one of those people, and you're giving that tool, that shed, them access to that shed, and that shed is your MCP server, they can go in and use those tools. I hope that helps explain that a little bit more. The types of MCP servers, you can have a coded server that you've built outside of UiPath that you can bring into UiPath as an MCP server. You can bring it through a package feed through a command, or you can connect it remotely to that MCP server. You'll want to make sure if you're using a third-party MCP server that those are trusted MCP servers, that those are trusted resources, right? Because there's a lot of people that build MCP servers and put them out there as openware, and you don't necessarily want to use everything. You want to make sure it's vetted. Eventually, we will have the capability of using UiPath's MCP server, which will be much more secure, obviously, because it sits within UiPath, and you have this UiPath security layer. Excuse me again. I apologize. I know that's rude. This is just not available for us to use at this time. It is newer, and it will be released, I believe, on the last the Insider Portal web meeting I went to. It's going to be released in 2025.10, which would be October, which would be sometime this month, hopefully. Does that help answer the question, or did you need more information on that? Akil, did that suffice them? Because I can't see the chat screen.
yeah. I think he said thanks. I think that should be, I think, good.
Okay.
But there's another question too, Chris, which is what is the benefit of the MCP versus just trying any tool
What is
within
the benefit?
Agent?
So
Yeah.
if I lived in your home and I wanted to remodel my bathroom and I didn't have a key to the shed that had the plumbing tools, for example, I'd have to go down to the local hardware store, the Lowe's, Home Depot, and buy my own, right? So it gives us the ability and flexibility for agents to use the same tools across agentic processes, end-to-end processes. Is that kind of is there a different way to explain that, Mason, that may be easier for people to understand?
I think that's pretty succinct.
Does that help understand? Anything else on MCP servers?
No.
Thank you. All right. Let's go to loading a queue. And hopefully you can see my studio screen. Yes, Diana? No?
Yes.
To load a queue, typically we're going to be taking data. It could be coming from a UI, a data table in a UI, and I'm reading that data table. could be coming from an Excel spreadsheet. It could be coming from different sources, but it's going to be in a form that's transactional. It's going to be, I can load one item, come back, load the next item, come back, load the next item. More often than not, in my own building of automations using queues, I use a dispatcher. We call it a dispatcher performer. There's another term people use, but I've always used dispatcher performer. I use a dispatcher, which is sequential. It can be. You can put it in the RE framework. Now load the queue using for each. So let's say I want to use a file here. Let's just say file name list items. Okay. So I'm going to go through this file name list items, and I'm going to go visit each line in that. Let's say it's an Excel spreadsheet. Each line in that file name in that Excel spreadsheet, I want to load each line as a queue item. I can add them as a queue item, or I can add the entire form, that entire spreadsheet, and bulk add those as queue items. So here I can choose which folder I want to add those to. Let's say I want to add them to the shared folder, and I want to say the queue name is list items. So as this processes, I want to add, let's say I want to add the name. Come on, Chris. Type string. I'll enter a VB expression for it. And then I want to add another one. Let's say I want to add, come on. Sorry. I want to add date of birth. And this may be in a string, it may be not, but we're going to do it in a string. And I can add grade. And this may actually be a digit, something along that lines, right? And I add those into a queue, and then I add just an expression of what I call it, because I'm going to pull that out. And I add those into the queue, and it's going to populate that queue in my orchestrator, right? Now, when I do it with the bulk items, I'm still going to choose my folder and the queue name.
One thing to note on this is if you don't choose your folder, it'll use the folder that you're default in. So when you deploy the process to that folder, it's going to use the folder that the process is deployed in.
Thank you, Mason. And then I'm going to do my data table. So I read, let's say I read this Excel sheet as a DB, a data table, or DT, sorry. I'm going to put that variable in there, and my column headings in that are going to define my queue names. Okay. Pretty simple to load a queue. It's fast, it's easy, and it's pretty simple. Let's talk about reading my queue items. Here I default, not personally, I default to an RE framework. And it's going to be in this RE framework, get transaction data, that I'm going to read my queue items. Here's a should stop. What is a should stop? That's if I have a process running and I want the process to stop. I can tell my process to stop. It will finish processing that queue item, the transaction item it just got, and then it will stop because I've given it a should stop notification in my code. And that stops it gracefully within Orchestrator, so I don't start faulting. So if it's a should stop, it's going to stop. If it's not, it's going to read until the transaction item is nothing. There's nothing left for me to process, so I'm going to read until there's nothing left to process. If there's still something to process, I'm going to go in and get my transaction data. From the queue that I've named. Now, this is going to come into my config folder. I'm not going to hard code it. And that's going to be over here. Let's open that up. Let's hope it opens in the same screen. I think it's in settings. Orchestrator queue name. Yeah, right here, sorry. It's going to be in settings. This is going to be the name of my queue that I've created that I want to pull the transaction data from. So if it's going to orchestrator queue name, you can see here, it's looking for orchestrator queue folder or orchestrator queue name, right? So I'm putting that in my config file, not hard coded, right? And then it's going to go get my transaction item. Bear with me, my bottom screen's back there. It goes. So here it's going to pull the fields that I created a variable for, a name for in my queue. So out transaction ID is going to be now to string. Out transaction field 1 may be whatever variable I use. Let's say it's name dot to string, whatever it might be. And as I go through and pull all the fields, they're all going to be in these out transactions, assigned to these out transaction fields. If I want to add more than 2, I'm just going to copy, I'm going to paste, and I'm going to change this guy to 3 because I always want to annotate my field, label my activities. Change this guy to 3, and I'm going to bring in what was it, date of birth, and then it was grade, right? And I can create as many transaction fields as I want. A general rule is you don't want to have hundreds and hundreds of transaction fields that you're pulling out of the queue. You want to make sure that you're only pulling the queue items that are necessary for your process. You don't want to have tons and tons in here, right? And that's how I process transactions. So it's going to pull out these transactions. It's going to attach these fields to my process, and it's going to then go through into my process transaction. It's going to then process each transaction that's pulled out. And it's going to loop in my RE framework until there's nothing left to loop, until there's no new data to do, there's no new transactions, then it's going to go to my end process. Questions about any of that before I give it over to Mason for integration services? And again, please apologize for my coughing.
So we don't have anything in the chat, Chris, but if anyone wants to unmute themselves and
I do have a question. Chris, so is it advisable to just retrieve the entire queue item and deal with the data that you require? Or would you narrow it down to just deal or retrieve only the fields that you require from the queue item? Because when you do bulk load, you might have an Excel spreadsheet with 100 columns.
Right.
You upload that and you only need 4 or 5 fields out of that Excel spreadsheet.
In my opinion, best practice is that you only pull the fields that you need from that queue item.
For efficiency. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
For efficiency. Otherwise, you're loading your bot's brain, so to speak, with all of this information, and it doesn't need all of that information. So you're going to slow your process a little bit. So for efficiency and accuracy, I would just pull the queue item columns that I need.
Got it.
Anything else? All right. Mason, looks like I did a good job. I'm going to turn it over to you for integration services.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes. Thanks, Chris.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was good. Orchestrator is necessary for this part, so it's a good thing we walked through it already. I am going to share my screen. Give me a second. I got to set my resolution. I ran into this the other day where it's just too small for you guys to be able to see, so give me just 1 second. Keep changes. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, here we go. So integration service is a way to connect to APIs. I'm not going to go into too much detail what an API is, but basically that is something on the web that you can send requests to, specifically HTTP requests, and you can get data from them or post data, which is used to create records in those, and do various operations on them. There's like 9 or 10 different things that you can do on those. We really only use like create, get, edit, delete, things like that that are your general CRUD type of operations. You can look up APIs and REST API definitions and stuff, but basically a REST API is just using HTTP requests, and it's like a database, but it's online. You're not doing SQL queries; you're doing requests against it. It might have a SQL database in the backend, but you're not really interfacing with that. Integration service from UiPath is a way to wrap those APIs and make them available to your processes in friendly activities. And there's 2 ways that we kind of deliver integration service. One of those is through UiPath's custom activities, or not their custom activities, but their pre-packaged integration service activities. When you go to integration service, let's see how we go there. I have it starred, so it shows up here, but when you actually look for it, it's going to be under the more drop down, and then you'll go down here to integration service. So I'm already in integration service. It's going to take you into kind of like an Orchestrator folder navigator, and you can go into different folders. I'm just doing this one in my workspace. And when you go in there, you can go to connectors, and you can see all of the out-of-the-box connections that UiPath offers for you. There's also one more option here that is build your own connector. I'm not going to go into creating a connector here because I don't really have a good example for it, but I can go into one connector that I have created and show you what that interface looks like. But you can create your own connector as long as you have authentication against an API that is publicly accessible on the internet. So one caveat about integration service is it's only available in cloud, and these API connections have to be accessible from the public internet. They can't be behind a firewall or on an on-prem system. They have to be accessible for everything. So that's your one requirement for using integration service. But as you can see here, there's a ton of different ones. Some of the most common ones are things like Gmail, Dropbox, and different file systems, Outlook, there's Google Sheets, there's Excel. Keep in mind, these are all going to be through like Office 365. So if you have it up in a public SharePoint, then you have to connect to that. The way that we create a connection is we can do it in this screen directly. We choose one that we want. Let's say Gmail. I want to connect one of my Gmail accounts, one of my many Gmail accounts. I have a lot of Gmail accounts. We can go here. So in this screen, we can view the different connections that I have. So I have a couple already, and we're going to recreate one of those. Triggers and activities that use these. These are the different activities that are available once you create this connection. You'll see that there's events and activities. Activities are used in your processes as an activity would. So like, let's say we delete a calendar event on our Gmail account. We can apply labels to an email. We can archive them. We can delete them. We can download an email. We can do a ton of different things with email. And then there are events. What are events? Events are, we'll go into Orchestrator and look at these a little bit later, but events are triggers. They are what fire off a process when something is happening in integration service. Now, there's different ways that events are delivered on the back end from UiPath, and it's good to know. Some of these, like the Gmail and Google ones, are truly event-based. So when something happens on that system, it fires off a webhook to UiPath and kicks that process off immediately. Other ones are polling based, and so that means that UiPath is going to that data source and polling it regularly. So things like Jira are polling based. the Discord connector. If you like Discord, that is polling based. So it's going to that source data and polling it for event changes and then firing off a bot when it finds one. Now that polling interval isn't going to be immediate, right? So don't expect for, say, if a Jira ticket is created, your bot to fire off within the next like 5 seconds. It's just not going to happen because they aren't polling that frequently. It's going to happen sometime within like the next 5 minutes, right? So that's your events. We'll go into how we create those triggers. That happens in Orchestrator, and we'll get an idea of that. But I'm going to go ahead and connect to Gmail here with my handy dandy UiPath account. So when you go to connect, it's going to bring you to this connection screen. There are a lot of different ways to connect. They're not all going to look exactly like this. Jira, you're going to need specific like user tokens. With Outlook, it's very much the same as this like Gmail connection workflow. When there is an account associated with it, normally it goes through that account authentication screen. When it's more of like a platform-wide thing, it's going to ask for something like a token or the system you're connecting to. The Snowflake connector asks for like a database and all the places that it needs to go to find your specific data set that it's going to be querying. So it's various different things. So when you go to connect, you can choose which folder you want to put it in. You can choose your authentication type. So Google supports these different ones. We're going to use Auth 2.0. This is what enables you to use like a direct Google account. And then we give it scopes. The default scopes that are needed are already in there, so you don't really need to apply those typically. And then we hit connect. And what this does is it's going to take you to your Gmail screen where you can see all of my Gmail accounts. But we're going to use this one. This is my UiPath account. Connect to this one. If you're already logged in, you don't have to put in your information, but if you're not, then it'll use Gmail's, like Google's actual authentication flow, so you'll just type your password in. It'll ask for permission, so it's going to ask for this. Since I've already created a connection for this one, I've already allowed some permissions, but so it already has the access that it needs. It already has has some access, as it says, but there's like a various list of things that it's going to request access to. If you're in an enterprise, if you're in a business and it's a managed account, you might have to get security to approve this connection, and so you'll have to go through that workflow within your business. But if it's just a personal account, then it's easy to just go in and approve this yourself. Continue. Now my integration is loaded. If we go over to connections, we will see this new connection. It comes in with a number 5 because I've connected this thing 5 times now, but that's here. So connections are created within a folder in Orchestrator, which Chris walked us through. There's ways to share those across folders. So if I'm trying to remember how to do this. I don't remember off the top of my head. You can create connections in any folder and it'll be accessible to the processes in that folder, but you can also use connections outside of your folder. So when we go to deploy a process that has connections within it, we can see other folders and pull in those connections. Now you have to make sure that your bot or your bot account has access to those folders to be able to use that connection. It specifically needs that robot role. You can create a custom role, and the permissions that you want to give it are there's a connections row, and you need to give it the permissions over that if you just want to scope down to connections in that folder. So that's creating a connection. How do we use a connection? What does it actually look like? What does it do? I'm going to go over to Studio Web. I'm going to create a new, let's create a new one. We'll use an RPA workflow. So I want to walk through where connectors can be used, where integration service can be used. So there's a lot of different places that you can consume these now. Really, I guess there's just the exceptions, right? You can't use them in apps, and that's about it. So you can use a connector in an RPA workflow on Studio Web or Studio Desktop. I'm going to walk through how we use those in Studio Web. You can use a connector in Maestro when you're building an agentic process. You can use connectors directly in an agentic an agent, right? So you can give the connectors to the agent as a tool, and it can use those directly. You can use connections, like we said, triggers are available in Orchestrator. Can't use them in apps, but you can connect to RPA workflows and apps that use the connectors. So there's basically any part of the platform where you're actually building something, any part of the build tier of UiPath can access integration service connectors.
Hey Mason,
Yep, go
we
ahead.
have a question in the chat that can we create connection on tenant level instead of folder level?
So a connection in a folder, integration service is deployed at the tenant level. So when you're connected to a tenant, right, that integration service instance is going to be at the tenant. When you create a connection in a folder, it's available to the whole tenant. Typically what I do for integration service is I'll have like my shared folder, and I'll create a folder underneath of that called connections, and I will just give the robot role access to that folder, right? And so I'll just use the connections from that folder in all of my processes. Sometimes I'll deploy a connection that's specific to a process in that process folder, but it's always going to be folder based. It's not going to be available to the whole tenant unless you set up your permission structure to give access to that role or group that the bot is in, and you only deploy your connections within that folder. So that's just how you got to do it. Little caveat there, but that's how integration service is deployed. Now that we're in an RPA workflow, we're building a process. This is in Studio Web. We can now use our connector. There's two ways to use our connector. We can actually set the trigger up here for this process. So I could say Gmail, right? I can say email sent, right? Let's type in workspace because these are actually under the workspace connections. Right, I can go email received, email sent. I could say calendar event created, updated, received, replied, right? I can use any of these types of connections that are specific to when an event fires on that system, right? They're pretty self-explanatory. Like this one happens when an email is received in Gmail, things like that. I'm not going to actually use that. I'll show you what it looks like. We're not going to actually use that in this process, but let's say email received. It's going to install our package, and then we can choose our connection, right? So this is the connection that I just made, this number 5 here in my personal workspace, right? And it's going to have some like connection specific parameters, like Gmail obviously is going to make me specify what folder I am receiving this one in, so inbox. You can also add additional filters. So let's say subject contains this, we could say body contains, right? Who is it to? Who is it from? We can also filter on labels. So this one is nice for Gmail because everything's coming in and has a label. So that's one way to do that. You can pull down your additional properties and make some further filters. So I could say with attachments only. I could mark it as read as it comes in. I could include my attachments or not. And then one thing that's very specific to integration service is the data that comes out of your connections. In this case, we get an email object and it is of type Gmail message, right? And a lot of times, this happens in Studio Desktop. This isn't just a Studio Web thing. When you put these activities in here, you're going to get like a pre-populated variable that you can then use later. You can also create a variable or change variable if you want to name your own variable. Otherwise, it's going to come through with this name, email, job data, things like that. With triggers, you can test them. So I could test this trigger, and I'm not going to click this right now, but basically what testing the trigger does is it checks if that trigger works when I receive a new email. So it's going to get the newest email and see if the trigger's working. Right now I don't have a new email in my inbox, so actually it looks like I have 26. So I could probably do this right now. But it'll get that newest email and fire off the process. If you debug on cloud up here or you're in Studio Desktop and you debug, it's going to fire off this trigger using the newest email in the inbox. So it's going to use that data as if that event had happened. But it'll just use the the data that matches that event. So if I didn't have any new emails and I fired it off, that trigger just wouldn't do anything, and so the process wouldn't run. But I do have 26, so if I ran it, it would work. I'm gonna change this back to manual. I don't, like, triggers are cool. I don't use them too often. Where I find myself using integration service the most is the actual activities. So if you go down here, browse by category, you will find a ton of different activity packages. All of these, pretty much all of them, are integration service. There's some exceptions in here, like UI automation is going to be your UI automation package, and different UiPath packages are in here. But pretty much all of these are integration service, right? We see our Google Workspace one here. So I can pull in my emails, right? I could get an email by ID. I could forward an email. I have all of these different actions that I can take. These are nice. They might not do everything that you want. Let's scroll down. So if the activities don't cover the case that you want, this is often the case in like Gmail and Google Workspace. They're pretty comprehensive because UiPath has built those out a little bit more. But maybe the connection is a new type and there's like more things that you need to do inside of there. They will often have this one, which is HTTP request, where you can send a request to the actual API itself and build the request, and it will use the connection to authenticate that request. So it's basically you're making an API request without needing to do the authentication, which in Google's case, the authentication is really complicated, so that saves you a lot of time. There's also some examples, Jira, Discord, Facebook, those connections, they have like a get record and list record. And then you can go through all of the different things. Like Discord, it has like chats, categories, roles, and those are the types of records that you can get. And then you can get those, list them, update them as necessary. So that's all cool. That's all useful. I am going to, let's get the newest email. And then let's send one. Oh, Lord. There we go. Send email. So getting the newest email, again, I have all of my filters and everything. Actually, I'm going to change the order of these. I'm going to send an email to myself, and then I am just going to get it so that we can see this in work. Now, before we do this, I do want to show what it looks like in Studio Desktop as well. So when we're in Studio Desktop, you go over here to Activities, and then when you scroll down, you see Installed, and then you'll see Available. So you can just make all those tiny, and then you'll have your available ones. These available ones include UiPath packages that are like these ones here are a bunch of different UiPath activities that you can pull in. But then pretty much everything else is, it's going to be integration service connections. So say I wanted to use my Google Workspace connector, then I can use these, right? These are my actual integration service connections in Studio. So let's say, yeah, see, I could go in here, send email, get newest email, right? Those are all available in Studio Desktop as well. So let's send one with the subject, hello world, the old classic. And it'll just say hi. I could include attachments in this. When working with integration service, kind of has its own like file system thing going in the background. When you're in Studio Desktop, you'll see this type called an iResource or iLocal resource. The same thing applies to Studio Web. That is your file type. basically the way that you work with those, it's like a regular file, but you will have to convert between iResource and iLocal resource occasionally. An iResource is something that exists in like a public file system like Google Drive, Dropbox, Outlook, or not, OneDrive, SharePoint, things like that. Those are iResources, so those exist out in the web. An iLocal resource is a downloaded file. So when I'm sending attachments, I'm usually using like an iLocal resource. I'll have to download an iResource from, say, not Workspace, but Google Drive, download that, and then change it to an iLocal resource, and then use that iLocal resource in my attachment to send the file. That's complicated. It's a little out of scope, but if you have questions on that, feel free to ask. I can walk people through how that works, probably build a demo process and share out the code. So you have all these different options in here. I'm not going to fill these out, but they're, it's sending, or this one's sending an email. So it's things that are specific to sending an email. Getting the newest email, right? We have this, it's kind of the same thing as the trigger because it's getting an email. I could filter down to this subject specifically if I wanted to. I could say hello world, copy it, and then say subject contains hello world, right? So that's going to get the newest email, right? And then let's just log that off. Log message. We will, now this is where using the properties of your activities comes into play. So I see that I have the get newest email. I have an email, and then I have all of the fields inside of that in here. So I can pull those in directly. Say I wanted to display my body of the email, I could do that, right? And it's going to use those. I could also use a regular or I could create a variable of a certain type and then use that. So show you what that looks like. Get newest email, right? Let's change the variable. Is this one not going to let me do it? Normally you can use a variable. It's not going to let me do it. Let's try to create one over here. Over here. I need the type of this one. And so this is a Gmail message type. I'm going to create one with Gmail message type. And then I'm going to use that. So now we're setting this to an actual variable. Email body goes away. So now this is gone. And I can change it to variable message, right? And then I have all of my fields that are inside of that. I can take my body again, right? And then log that off. So that's how you use variables. So get newest email. There's some other things in here. I'm going to set that to unread only. And I'm also going to put a breakpoint here. And then we'll go ahead and run this. So when I debug this, it's going to send an email. You see this run, and then successful. And then I am going to wait here for that email to come through. And put it in drafts. Let's do this again. It's something that you kind of have to watch out for is when you're using these, it saves it as a draft by default. So I'm just going to make it send it. Go to my inbox. All right, now I sent that email. It shows up in my inbox. And I am paused here at get newest email. I am going to just iterate over that one. Now let's go to our watches panel and look at this. Let's look at it. That's pending evaluation. Got to wait for these to come through. So now we have the body, right? And it came in as HTML. but this is the body of that email. We're in variable message, so this is the variable that we're actually watching. So you can see we've got pretty much everything that we can look at. We can explore over here in the watches. So that's what came in from the get newest email activity. Now we're on the log message, and I just log off the body, right? So if we go back over to run output, we'll see we got the body here. Right, and that's how you use integration service. Like I said, there's different ways to use it. So let's go to Maestro real quick. I have a little process in here. This is how I take care of the bills in my house, is this agentic process. But let's say I wanted to, as the designer here, I wanted to use an integration service connector. I can add a task. I can specify an action, and I can execute the connector activity or wait for connector activity, right? I can choose my connector here. These are all going to be, so you can't use, I think you can use custom connectors in here. Let's see. Yeah, you can use your custom connectors in here as well. So you can use any connector inside of this activity. Let's go to Gmail, right? We can use this Gmail connection. We're on number 4 now. And I can use any of these. I could send an email and it'll auto-populate it in here. This is pretty cool. So you don't have to build an RPA process every time to use those connectors. You can just call the thing straight up in Maestro in your agentic workflow. So that's how you use them here. That's cool. Not going to go into too much detail there. Let's go to agents, show you how that works as well. So your agents work more based on context, right? So they're a little bit, right? They're gonna take a prompt, and that prompt is going to be plain text. You can pass variables into the prompt. Not going to go through that because that's start fresh. So let's say if I gave it the prompt get latest email from Gmail, right? I can add a tool, right? And this tool can be a connector. Let's see. Ah, they've changed the way this looks. You used to be able to put connections straight in here, but it's not. It's changed. There's now this thing called an API workflow, which is basically like APIs. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's basically like wrapping your integration service with a more like API, like a contextual. It's like an RPA automation, but it only has API activities. Used to be that you could pull integration service connectors straight in here, but now it looks like you have to build those. Oh, no, there's this activity here. Oh, okay, there it is. All right, you can still pull in integration service. So you click activity here. This thing's like always under active development, so it's changing every time I look at Agent Builder. So I can pull in Gmail directly, and I can give the agent a connector activity, right? So one of those activities that I have in my RPA workflow, I can give that thing to the agent and say, hey, use this for anything. So since I've said get the latest email from Gmail, it's going to know, hey, I have a Gmail connector. I can get the latest email. And let's give it the get newest email activity, right? Now you can pull in all of your connection settings. You can give it some guardrails and different things. I don't do too much with agents, so I can't describe everything here, but basically you're using the integration service connector inside of your agent when it finds that relevant and it thinks it needs to use it. So you're exposing it as a tool inside of the agent, and it's able to call those. So that's how you use integration service connectors. Are there any questions on the usage or anything that you guys want to see, like drilled down into? We've only got like, what, 9 minutes left, so.
Yeah, and just feel free to take yourself off mute if
Yeah.
anybody has any questions.
So there is one question in chat, Mason. It's how does it handle MFA, multi-factor authentication?
That's a good question. So when I connected using this connection, right, you go through this dialog here, and if you try to sign into an account with MFA that's not signed, so all of these accounts that I have here I've already signed into, right? So I just click it and it goes. But if you try to sign into a new account that has MFA, say a Google account, it's going to go through the Google authentication workflow. So it'll give you the MFA step, and that connection will persist even though you had that MFA on there. It only requires that MFA once. So that's a really good question. If I had another Google account with MFA activated, I'd show you, but just, yeah, it just goes through Google's contextual dialog for signing in. So if there's MFA, it goes through that MFA step.
Yeah, even I had the same experience, like when I connected through for Office 365 or any other portal with integration service. Like even if you like connect it once, it won't be like asking you again for the same kind of a MFA. So you just have to verify it once and complete that whole connection in the integration service.
Yep. And then the last thing that the last part that I'll walk through is how to build a trigger. So a triggers happen in Orchestrator, right? Like your time triggers and queue triggers. So when you go to a folder, automations, triggers, you'll see event triggers in here, and these are your connections. These are the actual triggers that happen in integration service. So I can add a trigger, choose a process, and call it integration service trigger just for demo purposes. Click over to the next screen. I can select a connector, right? I could say Gmail, and then give it all the trigger details. So that there's like two ways really to do triggers. There's the trigger in the top of the process that works in both Studio Web and desktop, and then there's the trigger that you define in Orchestrator. And in one case, right, when you put the trigger in the process, it's going to pull the data out of the trigger, which is really helpful because then you can interact with it, right? So if I get an email, it's pulling the email. If you're using this type of trigger, it doesn't pull that email, right? Because it's not, you didn't program that into the process. So this is just going to fire off and not give you any of the context. So two different ways, different implications for each. One last thing that I'll show is if you like data service, then you will find this connection to be very helpful. There's now data fabric connectors. And so now you can trigger off processes based off of data service. So go nuts. It's pretty cool. It's really integrating the whole platform. So data fabric is just data service. You can also consume, this is pretty out of the scope, but I'll just mention it. You can consume integration service connectors in data service, so you can define an entity that is based on a connection, and it pulls in the fields that are relevant to that connection and creates it as if it was an entity. So you can do that as well. So tons of different ways to use integration service, and that is it. That's all I got.
You have a couple more questions. Let me see.
Yes. I just replied one is related to integration service isn't readily available. Is there a way to add a custom integration? So.
Yeah, I didn't walk through custom integrations, but I'll give the 1,000-foot overview here. So when you go to your connections, go to that folder, you can build a connector here, and it'll walk you through like connecting to the API. These are connectors that I already built. So I built one for Spotify. I built one for this phone, for my phone. It basically sends me a text and things. Or I can create a new connector. You can start from an API definition, from a URL. You give it a Swagger specifically, so a swagger.json. Say I wanted to connect to like UiPath Orchestrator, I could give it, tenants /swagger.index, and it'll take that. Or you can start blank and just create it from scratch. Not going to walk through that because it's pretty complicated and it'll take us way over time, but that's how you would create a new connection. Like I said, I already have this connector in here that I created. And when you get in there, you can look at the API, you can create resources in here. So I have one insert record that sends a notification to my phone. I have a message and a header in there and a type. And so you can create fields that go into that API. This is a little bit more in the weeds. It helps if you do know how to work with REST APIs and stuff. Some tools that help navigate this process are things like Postman, where you can play with the API before you go in here and then like scratch pad it in here. But I'm not going to walk through all this. There's a lot of complexity in this system, but there's walkthroughs out there from UiPath to how to use this.
I can see there is last question. Can you please show how UI integration is done? Is there any specific detail that you want to provide, Purnima? Like, what do you mean by that?
Is that like specific to UI automation? Like how we connect to UI through Studio Web, or oh, yes. So that's out of the scope here. We're not talking about UI automation. Diana, I don't know if there's like a specific session for UI automation, but that's not going to be part of integration service.
No, I don't think it's part of this course, right? Yeah. So any other questions from anybody? Okay. I don't see any more questions. So just a check with everybody, make sure that you copy all the information in chat. A lot of important links are there. We have links on how to register for the next course and where the important links are to find the recording, all that type of thing. And then just make sure that you guys finish up your self-paced homework this week. If you have any questions, just please put them in the forum for us and we'll help you with them. And we're really here to help you get through these courses and make sure that you have all your questions answered. So with that, Mason, thanks so much, you and Chris, for presenting today, and Akil and the rest of the team for answering the chat, Jose. And we'll see you guys next Monday. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.